All right. And welcome back to the First and Goal podcast. My name is Lewis. And next to me, of course, is my beautiful co host, Laraib, as we are about to tackle yet another amazing week of NFL football. Uh, Huge news, huge games this week. We just want to remind you that if you're listening to this on Tuesday, this will be kind of a shorter episode. We did a lot of traveling this weekend, I'll say that, as we attended one of the games, but we'll hop into that. But first, Laraib, the bounce back happened. Let's get into the picks. We
Oh
agreed a lot
boy.
this week, so it came down to the few pivotal games. And why don't you take us into those matchups?
Yeah, well, Lewis, it sure did. I picked my Seahawks to win in an upset. Obviously did not happen. And then also I thought Detroit could get it done in New England, but they put up a stinker over there, which was really disappointing. And that was it for the week. That was the only two we disagreed on. Your upset hit. I know we both like Dallas to win, but you got that on the upset. And that was really the difference. We both like KC tonight. And so another victory for you, Lewis. 3-1 so far, but I'll get it next week.
It's hard to say the NFL is ever predictable, but this week had a lot of favorable matchups. So it was easy to predict, but not a lot of disagreements. But there are a lot of big headlines. But the biggest news from this weekend, Larav, is you came into town and we attended the Seattle New Orleans
Yep,
game,
we sure
a
did,
game
Lewis.
with a lot of highs, a lot of lows, potentially the biggest high. Let's show the camera, show the folks at
All
home.
right, ladies and gentlemen, here it is. DK Metcalf's touchdown ball that he caught, 50-yard touchdown from this past Sunday. I have to get credit to my co-host right here, Lewis Butler. Thank you so
Fans
much, man.
team.
He DK just tossed it on the back of his head, and my boy, as 6'4" frame, goes up there, Mike Evans-esque, and just mosses the guy next to him. And boom, we got a touchdown ball from DK Metcalf, and he so graciously handed it to me. So thank you so much, Lewis. And it was such an awesome time just being there at the Saints game, even though we lost. But let's talk about that game a little bit, Lewis. What did you like out of the Saints offense?
I think establishing an identity, especially when you're down, guys, you're down your top two receivers in Landry and Thomas, and Olave goes down, halfway through this game. So I think the biggest thing was you needed to establish an identity on offense. You knew the Seattle defense is not that great, but you couldn't just keep doing the same things with lesser players and those positions. So it was a transition by Pete Carmichael to really utilize the Swiss Army knife in Taysom Hill. And boy, was he utilized this Sunday. 4 total touchdowns, 3 rushing, 1 passing. And he looked like the best athlete on the field, super explosive. And it was really exciting to see this running game going. This offensive line is a really good run protecting unit. And it showed not only with Taysom, but welcome back, Alvin Kamara, over 180 yards from scrimmage, 90 on the ground, 90 through the air, including a huge 50-yard pass. He looked explosive. And it's good news that next week we're expecting Landry and Thomas to be back. We still don't know about Jameis, and you know how I feel about that. Andy Dalton, he made a few mistakes, but he plays a smart game. He plays a clean game. So as long as he's not taking any too big of risks, he's not the playmaker Jameis is, but he just can get you in the right places, makes the right decisions, and just put the ball in your playmaker's hands. You love seeing Alvin Kamara being used in the passing game because that's where you know he's the most effective and most terrifying for defenses. But another big takeaway I had for this game was the Saints defense. It really shored up in the second half. We saw in that Vikings game last week, the Vikings, when they needed to get down the field and score, they did. And this was a situation where your defense was tested all game, and it came down to Geno Smith getting the ball, and we were able to sack him, force the Seattle to punt, and we ran the clock out on the ensuing possession. So good job showing up in the end, but there's a lot of questions across the board and just blowing coverages. And I don't know, who knows? The Seattle offense also did look very impressive on the other hand, which I'll let you talk about, Rob.
Yeah, I know you were saying you're really impressed by what Geno Smith did in this game. Every single time he got the ball in his hand, something electric would happen on the field. But going back to the Saints, Lewis, Alvin Kamara, every single time he plays the Seahawks, of course he just has to go off. And then
Has to.
Taysom Hill was really the X factor in this game. Every single time he got the ball, he was also electric. He had that 60-yard touchdown to put you all up ahead. And so that was disappointing to see for me at least. But then going back to the Seahawks, Geno Smith played really well. Rashad Penny was playing well until he got injured and he's out for the season. And so we'll see who comes into the backfield for them. Most likely Kenneth Walker, the rookie. But I really liked what I saw. But once again, it was the defense, which was, the question in this game. And we just couldn't stop him when we needed to. How many times Taysom got the ball at the goal line, just ran it in. And so that was disappointing to see. And it's going to be on these young guys that we have drafted, rookies. I know Tariq Woolen got an interception. We had some big tackles by Jordan Brooks, but still they have to tighten up on the secondary and on the front seven. But it's going to be fun to see this team if our offense keeps on showing out like this. But Pete Carroll get back to the drawing board on that defense, and then we had that fake punt ish type
Oh
play. I don't
God.
really know what that was about. Instant red zone possession for you guys, turned into a touchdown, and then of course the DK Metcalf fumble, which also went for another touchdown for you guys. And so it's just some little miscues in this game that could have gone either way, Lewis. But a really exciting weekend to spend with you and everybody else over there in Louisiana.
Yeah, definitely exciting game. But my biggest takeaway, big picture takeaway, is we were watching two teams that probably will not be playing in this year's postseason, unfortunately. Just too many holes on either side of the ball for both these teams. So I like to be optimistic. I like to root for my team. Of course, I'll never stop rooting for my team, but it was not great football for 48 minutes out there. But Laraib, we are going to move on to some of the other games, and it was tough to kind of catch up after a long day of going to the game, figuring out travel plans. But we managed, and we have a segment where we are going to introduce called Big News, where we hit all the biggest headlines from the weekend, all the biggest news that you need to hear for this league and for the NFL. I will start, Laraib, with the headline. Matt Rule has been ruled out for the remainder of this season. Matt Rule was released today as we're filming this on Monday, along with the defensive coordinator for the Panthers. We predicted this. We were talking about, he just wasn't getting the job done. This offense looked really, really bad with Baker Mayfield. You bring in, the new quarterback, and he looks worse than Darnold did last year. And overall, it seemed like Rule was losing the locker room. A lot of the players were not buying into the system, and it was just a really bad, culture over there. So the best decision for David Tepper, like I said, an aggressive, spending owner, was to move on. And I think it was the right decision. But Rob, what does this mean for the Carolina Panthers long term making this decision now?
Yeah, it really depends, Lewis. Are they going to build for the future, or are they going to scrap it all right now and get some draft picks? I know they have a really nice young defense. I know we both like Jeremy Chin and Brian Burns and some nice cornerstones there. But are they going to pack it in for this season and start shipping players off? I know just earlier today, Christian McCaffrey was in some trade rumors to go to the Bills. And so we'll see what owner David Tepper wants to do. Like you keep on mentioning, he's really aggressive. And so if he wants to get some of these higher draft picks and start building for a future, then they can start moving some pieces really quickly, Lewis.
Yeah, I think the biggest priority for this season going forward is seeing what you have and what can translate to future success. So fire selling all of your best players is not necessarily the best move. Now, some of your older veteran players who are just kind of French starters who might be on a different team in 2 years anyway, it might be, in your best favor to look to see if you can move them elsewhere. And also just see what you have with some of the younger guys. Matt Corral, quarterback, give him a shot out there. See, maybe bringing Darnold back in, because your future is definitely not Baker. But moving off of guys, like you said, the defensive pieces and Brian Burns, Chin, DJ Moore on the outside for the on the offense, it's just not a smart move, in my opinion. I think if you're bringing in a new quarterback, you want him to have a good defense and a good receivers who've been in the league, and they're still young enough to where it fits the timeline of a rebuilding franchise. So, but a player like Christian McCaffrey is very interesting. You bring up the Bills. I think a lot of teams would love to have Christian McCaffrey as just a weapon and a game changer for them. And honestly, right now, he could look at this season as a wasted opportunity for him, because we know his health has always been his biggest question. So a healthy Christian McCaffrey, as it looks right now, could be a huge piece for a contending team this season.
Yeah, and also some players have been voicing their frustration. I know DJ Moore, he's been beating around the bush a little bit about Baker Mayfield's play. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see, him requesting a trade from this team. Obviously, when they're shutting it down, might go to a team lacking a wide receiver, such as the Packers or the Chiefs, or even the Rams could use a wide receiver too.
He doesn't really have that type of leverage to get traded. I understand, like, we like to see all this movement. We like to see receivers on the move. As fans, I would like to see DJ. I would love to see DJ Moore in a different position. That. But I think for the best interest of the Panthers is he's a young, talented receiver, and he might not like the situation, but they're paying him the money, they're giving him everything he needs there. So for the franchise, it's probably best to keep him, but to move off some of these more expensive older players who could contribute more to a winning franchise.
Yeah, for sure, Lewis. But let's move on to another topic. The Giants upset the Green Bay Packers in London on yesterday, and sitting at 4-1, Lewis, right up there, top of the NFC. What do you think about this team? I know we both really like Brian Daboll. His Coach of the Year odds are moving right on up there next to Nick Sirianni.
It's been very strange to watch this team because before this week we've been saying it's fool's gold. They've been beating up on bad teams. They've never really looked impressive in any of their wins. And against the Cowboys, when they had their one loss of the season, we were saying, okay, the Giants have come back down to earth. This is not a good team. Well, we may have been wrong about both those programs because Dallas might be really, really good this year, and the Giants might be good this year, especially after the win in London. And all I can say is you bring up the name Brian Daboll, what he's brought to this team, and you have so many question marks on this team, and they're not going to be competitive. I understand they're 4-1. They might make the playoffs. I'll give them that. They might make the playoffs as opposed to what I was saying last week, where last week I was saying there's no chance. They might make the playoffs, but I don't think this is a team that can make much noise. But for the future, they have the right coach. And when you find that right coach, it solves so many problems on your teams. Because let's just look at yesterday specifically. In that game against the Packers, their offense was missing their top 4 receivers. Saquon was missing for an entire quarter of this game with a shoulder injury. And Daniel Jones was banged up, bloody hand. He had a bad ankle. And they still put together 3 straight scoring drives after halftime to keep them in that game. And it was these long, 11 play, 10 play drives that they just kept grinding out against this good Packers defense. And Daniel Jones not making any mistakes, not putting his team into harm's way, and just doing enough to put his team in a position to win. So huge credit to Daboll for constructing this offense, which it is not pretty. It is not pretty whatsoever, but they get the yards, they get the first downs, and they score when they need to score. And the defense looks really good. They got a lot of pressure on Aaron Rodgers. And so I really like what the Giants are building right now. And to say that they're a frisky team is, they're not going to be, more than a touchdown underdogs in a lot of games this season. But let's see what happens next week against Baltimore.
Yeah, and the big thing for me, Lewis, in this game was for Daniel Jones, no turnovers. He's been notoriously bad in his career with fumbles and interceptions, but a really clean game out of him. I know no passing touchdowns, but no turnovers is really good to see out of him. And then, let's talk about some of their upcoming games they have to play, Lewis. They play the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Seahawks, the Texans, the Lions. They still have to play the Commanders twice. And so you look at this schedule, it's a little bit favorable for them to, sneak in to a little bit of the, bottom tier of the NFC playoffs, especially with a couple teams not looking like them for themselves, like your Saints or my Seahawks. The Falcons are playing bad. We know the Panthers are bad. And so they're really looking frisky, Lewis.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing now is, like you said, it's nice to see this Daniel Jones improvement, but big picture, this is not a quarterback who can win you a title, but you absolutely have a head coach who can win you a title. And if you're a Giants fan, if you're a New York fan right now, I want to give a quick shout out to the New York Jets. Yes, it was Skylar Thompson, a quarterback for the Dolphins, but you handled business 40-17. So if you're a fan of football in the New York area, you're looking pretty good right now. But for Giants fans specifically, like you mentioned, the schedule's easy. They could have success this year and then build onto it for next year, potentially a new quarterback. This might be a team for a disgruntled quarterback wanting to change situations. Maybe it's Geno Smith's team. Who knows what can happen with the Giants next year, but the future is looking bright as they get their 4th win. Let's move on to our next big headline, Laraib, as the Los Angeles Rams corralled by the Cowboys at home. What's been the biggest problem with LA this year? Has it been offensively, the lack of cohesion with some of these new pieces, or is it the missing pieces gone from last year's unit, or is it the defense just not getting the pressure that we're getting last year and the lack of turnovers? There's a lot of things to point at, but for you, Laraib, you look at this team, you're obviously a rival in the division. What do you think is plaguing them the most at this moment?
Lewis, I really think it's that offensive line that they have. We know that Andrew Whitworth retired last year after the Super Bowl win, and now Matt Stafford has had pressure on him every single game. This game he was sacked 5 times. I will say they have played some of the better defenses in the NFL, Lewis. The Cowboys, the Bills, the Niners, and so you can expect a little bit of less play when they're playing those high level teams, but just to give up pressure on Matt Stafford all the time, it's really bad for him just to be hit all the time. We know he's dealing with an elbow injury. He's also dealing with a little bit of a shoulder injury. And so to keep on taking hits like that is not going to be good for him at all, Lewis. And then, when you're playing the NFC West division, I don't care how much you don't like the Seahawks, how bad they've been playing, or how bad the Cardinals play. That's a tough division to play in, Lewis. And so whenever you're beat up everywhere, your defense is giving up, 163 yards on the ground, and Cooper Rush is throwing for 100 yards. It's not really good at all.
I just think the biggest thing that made this team so unbeatable last year, and honestly throughout this McVay era, was how this defense was so explosive and was so turnover prone that they could just generate turnovers and put their offense in good positions. They are not doing that this season. There's been so many just like Stafford long drives. And on these long drives, the bad offensive line, you're prone to holding, you're prone to third and longs, and that's where you get a lot of the sacks, and it looks like a bad team. The Rams have only scored 1 touchdown in their last 9.5 quarters of football, which is just extremely alarming for what we assume is one of the best head coach quarterback combos in the NFL. Matt Stafford has been sacked the most times out of any quarterback in the NFL. There's so many alarming things. And yes, like you said, they're playing a really good defense, but that doesn't explain why their defense has been as unimpressive as it's been. You lose Von Miller, and Aaron Donald's still going to be Aaron Donald, but the secondary looks pretty banged up. And like you said, giving up 160 plus rushing yards at home is a reason for a lot of red flags.
Yeah, it really is. And just, looking back at this NFC, we have a lot of big players, but I don't think they're just out of the playoff race just yet, Lewis. The wide receiver 2 spot, they're bringing Allen Robinson, and he just hasn't been able to get any separation at all.
I just don't think he will. I just don't see it with him. I think he might be done.
Right. I had really high expectations for him coming into this game. When he played with Blake Bortles down in Jacksonville, he put up he was a top 4 wide receiver in the NFL, stat wise, playing with Blake Bortles. And then you thought, okay, he's going to go to Chicago, Mitch Trubisky and, Justin Fields, he's not playing well. So let's see what he does with Matt Stafford. And he just hasn't been the same, Lewis. No separation. Looks like, he's just not looking like his former self. And so, maybe they go out hunting for some of these other free agent wide receivers like OBJ, Lewis. Because, Cooper Kupp is not, he's not going to be able to sustain this really, getting 20 targets a game, going for 200 yards. It's just not sustainable in the NFL, Lewis.
Well, I mean, we know how the Rams have been dealing business for the past few years. F them picks has been their logo, or has been their motto. And that strategy can work if you're getting the high-end talent to replace, some of that depth on your team. But if you lose that high-end talent, you need to rely on your late round draft picks that you still have for those players to boom. And they just have not been getting any production. Like Tutu Atwell, he had a big catch last week, but he's been basically a ghost on this team. So they're relying on guys like Ben Skoranek and Tyler Higbee, late round draft picks, to just give them something besides Cooper Kupp. And it's been really rough for the Rams so far. Can they figure it out? Yes, they have a game against, obviously a crumbling Carolina team next week that they can kind of right the ship on. But the biggest problem is just this offensive line, lack of cohesiveness. And I don't think it's a problem you can just solve in one season. So we'll see what happens with them. We know they're a very aggressive team, so they'll definitely be looking at fixes in the open market. But this could just be a Super Bowl team who is kind of resting on their laurels a bit after the win.
Yeah, for sure, Lewis. But let's move on to another topic. We're 5 games into the season, Lewis. So why don't we rank some of our favorite teams in the NFC?
Okay, you go.
Well, yeah. So let me start. For my number 1 team, Lewis, I'm going to pick the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm 5-0. They've overcome a little bit of adversity. I know the schedule's been easy, but going down 14-0 to the Jaguars, they come back in that game and they win that one. And then a close one here in Carolina. Hopefully they'll learn some lessons on defense. Giving up that big rush to Kyler Murray, and they got lucky that the kicker just missed the kick at the end. But at 5-0, I really like them, Lewis. I know they don't have the pedigree like the Bucs have winning the Super Bowl a couple years ago. The Cowboys, that defense has been really good. The Niners went to the Super Bowl a couple years ago, but I just really like what this team has built, Lewis, and I think they'll finish the number 1 seed in the NFC.
Yeah, I mean, the way I looked at this for this, like, my top teams in the NFC, it's not basically standings. It's not just the standings, because you can look at a team and look at their performances in a microscope and say, okay, this team is better than what they're doing and they're better than their record indicates, or this team maybe is not as good as the record indicates and they've gotten some breaks. So the way I did this,
Giants.
well, who knows? That's what I was saying last week, but then they beat a team like the Packers, albeit in London, weird circumstances, but it's still an impressive win. So they could be a frisky team. But I'm going to give you my top 5 in the NFC right now, and in a specific order. At 1, I have Tampa. I just think Tampa, I have the most faith in this quarterback, and I think their defense has been still good this season. They had that one bad game against Kansas City, and they've looked. The offense has been the question mark on this team, but as they get guys healthy, get guys ingratiated with this offense with Tom, we saw in their Super Bowl year, it took them a while to figure things out. But whenever things were clicking, they went on a run. And I think it's just, Tom Brady, his pedigree, it's hard to see him with this team, with this talent. It's hard to say that they're not the best team, the team you can put the most faith into. But at 2, I agree with you. I have Philadelphia. Philadelphia is just a team for me where, they're super explosive. They have a lot of depth on both sides of the ball. I still have some question marks about their secondary, but their pass rush has been really good this season. So it kind of helps in those regards. At 3, I have San Francisco. Their defense is absolutely elite, but I do have question marks about some health. They lose standout cornerback Emmanuel Mosley, who's been balling out this season. Unfortunately, he's going to be out for the year. Nick Bosa also went down with an injury in that game. And then their offense, I like what I'm seeing, and they're going to get guys back. Jeff Wilson's going to be coming back soon. Not Jeff Wilson, Elijah Mitchell. And, they're starting to figure out things with Jimmy G again. But as we know, a Jimmy G offense has a finite ceiling to it. So it relies on the defense playing at their absolute best to get this team to the point where they want to get to. So that's why I have them at 3. At 4, I have Dallas. Even though they're not at the top of their division, I think this has been an extremely impressive team, even with a backup quarterback. This defense has been looking like the second best unit just behind San Francisco all season. And they have the weapons offensively to be a competent offense when Dak Prescott gets back. It's just about, finding that consistency with the weapons. And it's going to be hard because you had that really bad game when Dak got hurt in week 1 against Tampa. Now, can you come back and seeing what Cooper Rush has been doing, just kind of game managing? I feel like for the first few weeks when Dak comes back, it'll be a lot of playing safe, game managing, running the ball, not, doing too much, and allowing himself to get back into the rhythm of this offense to where by, week 10, week 11, they're looking like a really good unit. Because whenever Dak Prescott's playing, this team has always been top 10 in points in the NFL and yards. So I can't see them not being able to do that again with this talent they have on their team. And then at 5, I have Minnesota. They've just been, the offense has looked good in spurts. I just have big questions marks about, Kirk Cousins in big moments. So I think the talent is up there with the rest of these teams. That's why originally we had 4 teams, but I wanted to mention Minnesota just because they are 4-1. They are at the top of their division, but there's still question marks for this team in big moments that I have, especially the coach, rookie head coach in big moments, clock management, things like that looked concerning in some of their wins.
Yeah, and I think I'll also go down my list just like you. I think you and I just have just the Bucks switched. I have Eagles 1, Bucks 2, Niners 3, Cowboys 4, and Vikings 5, Lewis. But I think we can put it to rest now after Cooper Rush's 100-yard game against the Rams last week that Dak Prescott is 100% going to be that guy in Dallas. And, they're definitely going to move up on this tier list depending on how he plays this next week. And I'm going to go as far as to say whichever team wins on Sunday Night Football, we'll talk about that on Thursday. Whichever one of those teams wins, I feel like they have a really good chance of winning the NFC, Lewis.
I absolutely agree. I mean, two of the best teams in the conference. And I do still think Tampa is my favorite at this moment. But in terms of just like explosive defensive talent and great weapons on the outside, these teams can match up. It's just about, do you trust these 2 quarterbacks in a matchup with Tom Brady? And I know it's not that apples to apples, but in a lot of instances it is. And there are still teams that we didn't mention in this top 5, the Rams being one of them, that if they figure things out, they can maybe creep their way back into this conversation. The Packers also one of those teams.
The Seahawks.
Yeah, just some teams that I'm not saying New Orleans, even though maybe I should. but definitely some teams that can creep back into this conversation. They just need to figure things out on their own end. But that will do it for the state of the NFC. Laura, before our last big news headline that I want to throw at you is we'll go to the AFC. The AFC North, the Kings of the North, at least for now, are the Baltimore Ravens after defeating Cincinnati in Sunday Night Football. Just, I want to get your gauge on, does this mean the Ravens have the division won, or is it too early to tell? Because honestly, both teams had their moments and both teams had their bad moments in this game. So what was your biggest takeaway following Sunday night's game?
My biggest takeaway, Lewis, was definitely that Ravens defense. I know we've been griping on them, giving up the most yards in the NFL, or almost giving up the most yards in the NFL. But they locked that down this week. We talk about this is going to be a high scoring affair, but the Bengals really couldn't get anything going against Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey on the outside, even with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd all playing. And really, it was Lamar without Rashad Bateman just out there, him and Mark Andrews playing pitch and catch on the field all night long, and they were able to get it done. I know the Browns, not many people are going to talk about them winning their division, but they've lost some really close games. I know the Chargers game, they could have won that one with the field goal. Just some, bad, couple bad plays here and there, and they lose that one. So I think this division is still wide open, besides the Steelers, right? As long as Matt Canada is calling plays over there in Pittsburgh, I'm picking the other team, hint for my picks next week.
Pittsburgh's out. Pittsburgh's
Definitely
out of my mind right now. They're so bad.
For sure. And then, Ravens, Bengals, they're going to match up again later on in the season. And so we'll see how that goes, but don't rule out the Browns just yet.
Yeah, you definitely brought up my biggest takeaway as well, was this Ravens defense. And this is a spot where they had to step up. It's not like, oh, it's nice that they did. They had to step up in this matchup. This is a home divisional game against probably your biggest opponent in the division. And you needed them to step up in this home matchup after what we've seen from the last 3 weeks of blowing big leads and giving up explosive plays. So the way they were able to lock up this big play Cincinnati offense was really admirable. But on the other side, Cincinnati offense, how are you not able to get these big plays going? We saw last year, those 2 matchups against the Ravens, it was bombs away all game long. But it seemed like when they double teamed Jamar Chase and T. Higgins couldn't get anything going deep, this offense was kind of just like a pop gun offense, just quick, everything short. They could get nothing going deep all game. And that's where this offense is their most explosive. So this too high safety look with the shell defense has been, the most popular look in all of football nowadays. And I think that it's really hindering a lot of these big play offenses. You need to figure things out. You need to be able to be patient. You need to get a running game going. And I think the offensive line played well in this game against the Ravens. But this is a game. And also, Zach Taylor had some very questionable decisions, including a 4th and goal play that was just so poorly executed. It was just miscommunication in general. It was so random, and it ultimately ended up losing them the game. There were some plays by Joe Burrow late to make this game look closer than it actually was. But once you get into Justin Tucker territory, you might as well start getting on the buses, because once Lamar got in past the 40-yard line, I mean, at that point, we should start shaking hands on the field. Justin Tucker is automatic, and he will win them a lot of games this season, as he has won them in the past. So I really like how the Ravens are looking. And I'll really quickly on the Browns. This is a team that honestly, Laraib, should be 5-0. They have lost 3 games this season with just coaching malpractice, just awful execution, games that they've been handed. You're up a crazy amount against the Jets and just blow the game in your first loss. Your next loss is just you get ran on by Marcus Mariota and Tyler Algier in a game where you had the ball going late and you could just not figure anything out. And then this last game, the Chargers hand you the win. They go for it in a 4th and goal situation. And first off, you turn the ball over in the end zone, down 2. And then the Chargers immediately give you the ball back with a minute left on their 46-yard line. And you miss a kick. I mean, obviously the kick's unfortunate, but you could have done so much to win that game that the Chargers handed to you. And they're 2-3, looking like a team that might miss out on the playoffs this season. So state of the AFC North, Ravens up, Bengals, Browns, and definitely Steelers down.
Yeah, Lewis, We'll see how that division goes and how the whole AFC goes. We can talk about those guys a little bit later in our review for next week. But moving on to Thursday Night Football, one of the games of the week, Lewis.
Games of the year.
We have your Washington Commanders going to Chicago to play the Bears. This is an even line, Lewis. What does your boy Carson Wentz need to do to win this game on the road?
Not turn the ball over in the red zone, play good offense, and look like a competent quarterback. Or Ron Rivera will be fired.
Yeah, I will say Justin Fields 200-yard passing game last week, so give it up for him on that one. But I think this is going to be a snooze fest on Thursday. I'm not even sure we'll be watching this game, Lewis, to be honest. I will say the Commanders did have a chance to beat the Titans last week, but like you mentioned, just that Carson Wentz turnover on the goal line, and that's what's going to cost him. But I think you're playing against a Bears team who really, if you can put up 17 points in this game, Lewis, the Commanders, I think they can win this game easily. So I will take the Commanders 20-17 in an awesome game with our boys Kirk Herbstreit and Al Michaels with the commentary.
Oh, absolutely looking forward to it. I'll be watching every second of this game. But yeah, I'm going with the Commanders this game, and this might be the last time I pick the Commanders to win a game all season, unfortunately.
So what's your score prediction?
Give me 20 to no, you know what? I'm gonna say this is a really exciting Thursday night football matchup. I'm gonna go let's see, it was visible by 3. It's gonna be 5 field goals to 4 field goals, 15-12. Commanders gut it out in a game of the year. But that will do it for our podcast. Rather short one, but big days for us. We're gonna come back at you next week. Teams are starting to be on buys. We're really starting to get into the thick of the NFL season. The contenders are starting to make their way, showing who they are, and the teams who are looking at some of these bright young quarterbacks in the draft are starting to look that way, as we can tell. But yeah, the NFL is starting to really heat up, and we are excited to stay with you for the rest of the season. Anything else you want to say before we head out, Laraib?
No, just our socials will be down description below. Go ahead and check us out on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. But besides that, this is the First and Goal podcast. Signing off.
Peace.